My name is David Schimmelpenninck-Van Droy. I'm with the History Department at Brock, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the very first Charles A. Sankey lecture. This is a series of lectures in the study of Freemasonry. Dr. Unefors is director of the Center for Research into Freemasonry at the University of Sheffield in England. Dr. Unefors is a leading specialist in the history of Freemasonry. He is the editor of a series of collected volumes published by the Center at Sheffield on various aspects of Freemasonry. Also the editor of the Journal for Research into Freemasonry and Fraternalism, get your copies now, and is a man of unusual linguistic abilities. Knows a frightening number of languages, all of them, or most of them, are useful to help understand Freemasonry, including even Russian, which of course, I was delighted to learn. He's educated at various universities in Sweden and also German. And is also, being a former cavalry officer myself, I'm delighted to learn that he's also a former officer in the Swedish Royal Dragoons. So, Dr. Unefors, welcome. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, almost exactly 40 years ago, in October 1970, Dr. Charles Alfred Sankey inaugurated a lecture series titled The Chancellor's Lecture here at Brock University. His words at the occasion were, "I hope to establish not just a lectureship, but a tradition at our university, a tradition which will each year emphasize some facets of the unity of knowledge, some understanding of the interrelation of specific disciplines, some recognition of their breadth and height and depth of the human spirit, some challenge to each one of us to widen our horizons and to raise our eyes." I think these words are very appropriate to quote today at this occasion, when a new tradition in the name of Charles Alfred Sankey is going to be inaugurated at this university, lectures in Masonic studies. For the occasion, Sankey had chosen a particular piece of music that I cannot withhold from you to play here and now as well, given the technology works out fine. What we just heard was a revolutionary approach towards the new generation of electronic music. Wendy Carlos playing classical music, in this case a piece from Johann Sebastian Bach's Third Brandenburg Concerto on a Moog synthesizer, which was the first generation of electronically generated music. Sankey had selected this combination, quote, as illustrating combination the art of Bach and the science of electronics in the language of music, unquote. He continued his lecture with quoting from English 17th century poetry and stated boldly, quote, "Science and arts find a common dwelling place in men's minds," unquote. Sankey warned of specialization and recommended as an antidote to the colossus of detail, as he called it, a model of knowledge dating back to the Middle Ages. The 7 liberal arts and sciences, constituted of a unity of 3, the trivium, embracing grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and a unity of 4, the quadrivium, consisting of arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy. Sankey branded the first 3 a trinity for right communication. The 4th, 5th, and 7th formed a trinity to understand and utilize the universe, and the 6th, music, a symbol for universal harmony. With examples from the natural sciences, Sankey then considered the relation of arts and sciences to the values of beauty, truth, and goodness. Painting this fascinating panorama, he used examples from physics, mathematics, music, and poetry on an equal level. And he finished his lecture with the words, quote, "Participation in life. That is what the sciences and arts are all about. Dangerous, challenging, dynamic, creative, vibrant, alive. Bringing the heritage of the past into an ever-advancing present. Observing, discovering, improving, building, creating. This surely is, for us, the ultimate enterprise. In its science and the arts participate, complementing, supplementing, and supporting each other in the human situation. And our situation, if I know anything about it at all, is in a wonderful universe, greater than our greatest imaginings. Of it and by it we are made. And as the universe has made us, we, on an infinitesimal but finite scale, seem perhaps to have been given an opportunity to help to shape the universe to be." Unquote. From the University of Toronto Hall of Distinction, we learn that Charles Alfred Sankey devoted most of his career to research in the Canadian pulp and paper industry. He pioneered new processes and methods and was an expert in the optical properties of newsprint. He was outstanding in his pursuit for technological progress through the activities of the Canadian Pulp and Paper Association. But the same Sankey also was, for 82 years of his life, a devoted Freemason in a huge number of Masonic bodies. For me, a trained historian of sciences and ideas, with a particular focus on Freemasonry, personalities like Sankey are thought-provoking. Sometimes they constitute an enigma. Why would a distinguished natural scientist and engineer like him want to join a mysterious brotherhood that is footed on hermetic traditions? What would it possibly mean to him to be a member of a fraternal order? And if he was influenced by his membership, would it be possible to see traces of his Masonic ideals and engagement in the outside world? The idea that Freemasonry has an impact upon its members is perhaps one of the most common and powerful perceptions of the fraternity, a perception that requires careful examination. My lecture today is divided into 3 parts, of which we already have moved a bit into the first. This first part served the purpose to introduce to my terminology, and with a closer look at Charles Alfred Sankey to exemplify what I'm after to outline. In the second part of my lecture, I will present genealogic developments of certain perceptions, and will in my third and last part suggest that we, through a deeper study of perceptions, will receive a deeper understanding of the history of Freemasonry. But what are perceptions, and how will I use the term? This lecture treats perceptions of Freemasonry from the 18th century to the internet. The perception is primarily defined as the use of our senses to acquire information about our surrounding environment, but it also means an attitude or understanding based upon what is observed or thought. In this latter definition that I employ, perceptions certainly are nothing static nor given. Attitudes are highly subjective and emotional, and understanding is, since Locke, traditionally seen as a limited human capacity. An observation depends to a large extent upon the viewpoint and thoughts are either based upon rational or irrational reasoning. Perceptions do not necessarily be true in a neutral and objective sense. Perceptions are rather subjective, and they are always formulated from a certain viewpoint or standpoint. The same canvas in an art gallery looks completely different from different angles and has a different impact on each individual observer, which doesn't make the single viewpoint false per se. It is this constructed character I will trace in the subsequent and develop in the subsequent talk. I do not believe that Freemasonry is a historical phenomenon that was given at a certain point of time and that not has been subjected to processes of change and transformation adapted to various contexts. Perceptions of Freemasonry, as I will treat them, are primarily viewpoints taken outside the fraternity in the public domain based upon real events and on associations, ascriptions, attributions, some of them caused by the next category of perceptions I will introduce. And these perceptions tend to change very slowly and can also be branded heterostereotypes, that means stereotypes that are formulated by somebody else. Viewpoints are formulated in and communicated through various forms of media, primarily text, but also images, ranging in time from the first news articles to video clips on the internet. Secondly, perceptions of Freemasonry are also viewpoints taken within the fraternity, based upon experience, self-attributions, and reaction upon the outside perception that are brought from inside to the outside public domain. Also, these perceptions tend to remain stable over time and can be called auto-stereotypes. So stereotypes that are formulated by yourself. They are also communicated through various media, and a particularity in this context are, by the way, Masonic song texts that I have researched in a paper that frequently reflect upon the outside perceptions of Freemasonry. I'm not going to sing a Masonic song yet. I could have done that. These two modes of perception, external from outside upon inside and internal from inside to outside, form a complementary dynamic of self-perception and external perception. And this dynamic has often been described as an opposition between secrecy and openness, opacity and transparency, and I will return to this significant driving force in my overview over the genealogical development of perceptions. Already this division of what is perceived to be Freemasonry causes me to prefer to talk not about one singular Freemasonry, but about a plurality, multiple Freemasonries, rather than one monolithic phenomenon or organization spelled with a capital F. The analysis of perceptions will not hold true for a certain Freemasonry, but for various expressions of Freemasonry as one of the most creative form of associational life in a Western context. Is the impact of Freemasonry imagined or real? When returning to this question and my initial example, Sankey, it is possible to trace the perception that there exists a close association of Freemasonry to arts and sciences. In his Chancellor's lecture, presented almost 40 years ago, Sankey brought a perception taken from Freemasonry into the public domain. For people like him, and with him the founding generation of fraternity, the link between Freemasonry, science and arts was so obvious that it could not be dissociated. Sankey's words, quote, "Science and arts find a common dwelling place in men's minds," unquote, could have been taken from any Masonic lecture from the 18th century and onwards. Hence, it's also not surprising to find a charge titled "The 7 Liberal Arts and Sciences" that Sankey presented to St. George's Lodge No. 15 on December 12, 1967, at the occasion of working on the second, the apprentice degree. Already almost 3 years before he kicked off his Chancellor's lecture. Sankey, by then Deputy District Grandmaster of Niagara A, already formulated his main argument for the subsequent public lecture. We live in an age of specialization, a dictatorship of the detail, and only a synthesis of the sevenfold approach towards knowledge will help us to understand our true place in the universe. Sankey concluded his charge to the Brethren of St. George's Lodge with the words, quote, "So as a Masonic thing to live by, I do give you the liberal arts and sciences, all 7 of them, and bid you, as does the ritual, extend your researches into their hidden mysteries. You will never regret a moment spent in this endeavor in search of wisdom. You will never cease to wonder at their beauty and their truth." Unquote. Certainly, if Sankey's deep appreciation of a holistic approach towards knowledge has its roots in the 2nd degree of Freemasonry, it has played a significant role in a significant Canadian scholar's life. What was evident to him in the context of a private lodge could be transported to a public lecture. But frustratingly enough, our research often terminates in a dead end. Many Freemasons never reflect upon if they had joined Masonry because of its ideology, or if their personal values had been influenced by their membership. This is one of the greatest challenges for any sound academic research into Freemasonry. The hen and egg question of what comes first. A certain mindset that already is present and that only will be reinforced by Masonic membership, or the other way around. A receptive soul and brain that will be formed by its Masonic membership. It's a very important question, because we need to be very careful. Both lunatic conspiracy theorists at the one end, as much as innocent art historians on the other end of the scale, just to pick 2 extremes, are able to ascribe Freemasonry the power to influence over the political development of a state as much as over the artwork of a painter, without any shrink of evidence of Masonic affiliation. It is perhaps this idea that Freemasonry is a power able to influence both to the negative and the positive that's one of the strongest figures of thought in the perception of Freemasonry ever since. Fortunately, but extremely rarely, in a case like Sankey's, we do almost know for certain. We can establish that the 7 liberal arts, for instance, play a significant role in the Masonic ritual for the 2nd degree, and we can establish that Sankey opposed this concept of knowledge with what he called specialization, or the atomization of knowledge, the colossus of detail of his own time, which certainly is something we as scholars in 2010 also recognize. Having asked his son George about it, I received an interesting reply. He, Charles Alfred Sankey, was in many ways a Renaissance man with his wide-ranging interests covering all of the liberal arts or sciences. He read widely and had an excellent memory, and his principal interests outside of work and family were Masonry, music, education, and cultivating his roses. He was an excellent speaker, and his talks almost always brought together philosophy, science, art, beautiful language, often poetry and music. His son John Sankey wrote to me, "Dad definitely advocated a crossover between arts and sciences, and saw music as a representation of this. However, to him personally, I believe it went further. Music seemed to directly evoke scientific ideas for him." In Charles Sankey's case, 2 perceptions of Freemasonry hold true, as much as they can. First of all, for him the close association of Freemasonry to science was evident. He transported it from the private context of the lodge to the public domain, the Chancellor's lecture. And in his case, we can also confirm positively that Freemasonry had an impact upon his personal beliefs and values concerning the nature of knowledge. These beliefs were either formed and inspired by or reinforced by his Masonic membership. I wish that I, as an historian of Freemasonry and related fraternal orders, always would have as much evidence as in Sankey's case. The second part of my lecture aims at to examine the genealogical development of a couple of perceptions of Freemasonry ever since. So we have the second part of the lecture between transparency and opacity and genealogical perception, and I will present 3 examples. If we consult the most common source of knowledge of our times, the internet, we are overwhelmed by the information available on Freemasonry. The result for a Google search on Freemasonry is almost 1.5 million hits. Google Images, almost 421,000, and 14,000 video clips on video sharing site YouTube. This massive information can immediately be roughly divided into 2 separate categories. Information produced by Masonic bodies, regardless of regularity here, and information about Freemasonry, either neutral and informative or partial and affirmative. The first fundamental study on Freemasonry on the internet was, by the way, conducted by a Canadian Masonic scholar, Trevor McKeon, and published in the latest volume of the yearbook AQC. McKeon's overview of the development of information available online by regular Masonic bodies asks for many complementary studies, and I hope there is someone in the audience here who understands that the topic Freemasonry on the internet would form a highly significant topic for an MA or a PhD thesis. What also immediately emerges when looking only on the surface at the search results of the internet is that there is a divide between accusations and defense, neutral and spectacular information. This information is sometimes wrapped in faked objectivity, as for instance in the case of Yuri Lina's so-called documentary, The Real Truth About Freemasons, screened in 6 parts on video sharing site YouTube. It's sometimes difficult to get good screenshots on YouTube, but what we can see here is Yuri Lina's car parked outside Roslin Chapel in Scotland. He's also the author of a book that has been translated to English called Architects of Deception, that I show here on my slide. If we believe that these lines of perception are an invention of our contemporary times, my lecture will hopefully demonstrate that they are not, but they have been in existence since and can be traced to the very origins of modern Freemasonry. As we will see, the appearance of Freemasonry in urban London in the 1710s is intimately connected to an open treatment of Freemasonry in the press. The seemingly secret brotherhood was right from the beginning covered in media. We find one of the first significant articles ever in the London Journal of 16th of June 1722. And since I will argue a bit around this article, I will quote it extensively here. A few days ago, a select body of the Society of Freemasons waited on the Right Honourable the Lord Viscount Tunstead, one of His Majesty's principal Secretaries of State, to signify to His Lordship that being obliged by the constitutions to hold a general meeting now at midsummer, according to annual custom, they hoped the administration would take no umbrage, the resentment, at that convention, as they were all seriously affected to His Majesty's person and government. His Lordship received this intimation in a very affable manner, telling them he believed they need not to be apprehensive of any molestation from the government, so long as they went on nothing more dangerous than the ancient secrets of the society, which must be of a very harmless nature, because as much as mankind love mischief, no ever betrayed them. This short notice contains in a nutshell the problem with Masonic secrecy, its relationship to the public sphere, and a particular Masonic response to that problem. First of all, a private society approaches a high-ranking representative of the government with the concern that it might find a gathering of the society occasionally prompted by its own internal rules and regulations, inappropriate. Loyalty to this government is expressed. The governmental representative on his part declares that no suppression is to fear from the government as long as there is nothing more dangerous with the society than its ancient secrets, that in turn cannot be especially harmful as nobody ever has revealed them. The notice suggests furthermore that there might have been resentment on part of the government towards the meeting of the Freemasons, and that there was a potential danger connected to these kinds of assemblies. The assessment of his lordship is, however, remarkable, and of course made before any Masonic exposures had been produced so far. Secrets that not have been revealed by anybody so cannot be dangerous. This statement goes contrary to all accusations towards Masonic secrecy ever since, and would have taken the entire point out of Dan Brown's recent novel, The Lost Symbol. In the eyes of suspicious governmental and church authorities, it is precisely the fact that Masonic secrets are perceived so inaccessible which constitutes their potential danger. But only weeks later, the situation would profoundly change forever. A letter to the editor of the Postman attacked, quote, Freemasons pretending to great matters and giving themselves titles which nature or the laws of the constitutions in England never gave them. Letter writer especially criticized the new social mix in the lodges, uniting working men with aristocrats, scandalously tying the leather apron to the sides of persons of noble and ancient families. Another point of critique was Masonic secrecy, the usage of a secret word which has for ages past been sacred to the profession and by which they can know one another in all or in any part of the world. And only weeks later, as a direct response to these accusations, the earliest version of a printed constitution was published in a series of articles in the same periodical. Media treatment of Freemasonry predated the publication of the famous Constitutions of Anderson with a year. And already by then, the dynamic interplay between accusations and vindications, attacks and replies, was born as a constitutive element in the perceptions of Freemasonry. It might be argued that the publication of the constitutions themselves in 1723 was a way to take control over the discourse. With one version of its mythical history and charges already in the public domain, it was important to make a statement which version actually was the sanctioned one. The article in the London Journal and the reaction upon it is the first evidence in the development of perceptions of that there is an unhealthy relationship between Freemasonry and politics. Already from its outset, Freemason Britain was caught in the tensions between Hanoverian loyalism and opposition. Not only were a number of other fraternities established that ridiculed Freemasonry, but in 1740 a procession of miserable scald masons was organized in London, in effect an anti-government demonstration under the disguise of Freemasonry. Also, the establishment of Grand Lodges in Ireland and Scotland, as well as another two competing Grand Lodges of England during the 18th century, can be interpreted from the viewpoint of political instability and social unrest in Britain. Clearly, Freemasonry's association with politics is a very long-lasting perception. Or as this title page from French periodical L'Exprès from October 2009 puts it, the image is asserted that there exists liaison dangereuse between Freemasonry and politics in France. Once the idea of a relationship between Freemasonry and politics was born, right from the beginning, it was not far to ascribe the fraternity that it in fact had a political agenda, or that other forces used it in order to achieve specific political goals. We see this idea emerge in continental Europe, European discourse during the 1780s. The perception can be traced in the context of the collapse of a Masonic system called the strict observance in 1782. The development of Masonic higher degrees constitutes a separate area of research that would require at least one more lecture. But for our purpose, it's enough to mention that the strict observance was an all-European Masonic order, based upon the idea that the Order of Knights Templar was hidden within Freemasonry. When finally the system imploded, as the secret superiors that were set to govern it could not be revealed, 1,600 high-ranking members of the European political and cultural elite belonged to its inner circle, and lodges counting up to 50,000 members in total in Europe were affiliated to it. This is the title page of the minute book of one of the chapters in this Masonic system from a city called Rostock in Germany at the Wars of Born. And what we can see here is then the idea of this strict observance that Freemasonry is divided in three parts. In this consistent degree system leading from the Order of Freemasons, represented by the blue square, via the Order of St. Andrew, represented by the green St. Andrew's cross, to the Knightly Order of Jerusalem, and that's the red square that is turned upside down here, linked through the red cross of the Knights Templar to heavenly protection. So it was an immense Masonic organization in Europe that spread from Russia, Sweden, Germany, France, Italy, Switzerland, across European space. And that divided its organization into virtual provinces that were transgressing governmental or state borders. The reasons for the collapse and the real intentions behind the establishment of this system were discussed openly in the press. And in this discussion that then takes place after 1782, a split between a more enlightened and a more romantic concept of Freemasonry became visible. This division facilitated, on the one hand, the development of the ultra-enlightened Order of Illuminati in Bavaria, and fueled, on the other hand, strong mysticism like Martinism, Swedenborg's spiritualist teachings, alchemy, or magical practices as carried out by Cagliostro, who was a prominent Freemason in Europe. Freemasonry was locked in a bitter conflict between these factions, and since the debates were carried out in public, arguments from the different parties could easily be picked up by those who always had opposed the fraternity. The process of differentiation coincided with social unrest in France, unleashed in the 1789 revolution, an event that sent surges across the continent. And hence it was easy for authors who wanted to describe the real causes of the violent events to link to positions that already were pre-formulated. The most prominent and influential of authors writing in the aftermath of the revolution became a French émigré to the United Kingdom, the Abbé Baruel, who in his London exile wrote an ardent tract in several volumes, published between 1779 and 1799, Mémoire pour servir à l'histoire du jacobinisme, accusing the philosophical forces of the 18th century, among them Freemasonry and the Illuminati, to have orchestrated the violent overturn of governmental and church authority. And even if Baruel's writings perhaps could be explained away with his Catholic and hence anti-Masonic spirit, the situation worsened when John Robison, a respected natural scientist from Edinburgh and Freemason himself, in 1798 published a much similar study, Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, carried out in the secret meetings of Freemasons, Illuminati and medium societies. And in parallel to Baruel, Robison pointed out that continental Freemasonry had been perverted into a vehicle of the revolutionary cause. Where not already prohibited, European governments certainly listened to these accusations and imposed consequently harsh regulations to organized social life in general and to secret societies in particular. Even in Britain, an Unlawful Societies Act was passed in Parliament in 1799, from which Freemasonry was made exempt after many debates and political moves. However, governmental regulation of Freemasonry was in place in the United Kingdom right up to 1967. In the 1990s, a much similar debate as already witnessed 200 years previously, manifested itself in British society by two official governmental investigations into the role of Freemasonry in public life, carried out by the House of Commons Home Affairs Committee between 1997 and 1999. The idea of Freemasonry's unholy involvement in politics was by 1800 an established figure of thought and is a key element of all subsequent perceptions. After the Morgan affair in 1826, the anti-Masonic party had a deep impact upon public perception of Freemasonry in America, opposing the supposedly strong influence of Freemasonry on American politics. And in Europe, Napoleon's revival of Freemasonry to serve his own political purposes certainly contributed to cement such an idea. And when, at the end of the 19th century, the Grand Orient openly supported the Paris Commune and broke away from the United Grand Lodge of England over the issue of freedom of conscience, French Freemasonry's association with politics still is taken for granted, causing a split in the Masonic world that by my predecessor, Andrew Prescott, has been branded, quote, the Masonic equivalent of the Berlin Wall, unquote. On the same time, many Christian churches have adopted anti-Masonic positions. Masonic membership is still not regarded thoroughly reconcilable with Catholic faith. It's condemned in the Eastern churches and the evangelical churches equal often Freemasonry with evil. Initially intended as a deceit of the Catholic Church, Leo Taxil invented the image at the end of the 19th century that Freemasonry was nothing else as devil worship. With a spectacular, and we see the title page here, and richly illustrated book, Taxil managed to convince the Catholic Church of the evil character of Freemasonry. They were not very hard to convince, one can add. What, however, was intended as a hoax set surges in movement that still are a powerful element in the perception of Freemasonry. Another dangerous ingredient to this perception was added at the same time as Taxil. Although later revealed as a forgery from circles around the Tsarist secret police, the protocols of the Elder of Zion, the alleged minutes of a Jewish organization revealing their goal to undermine political, social, cultural, and economic order of the world, pictured Freemasonry as a tool to accomplish this agenda of a new world order. Freemasonry was an active part, claimed the protocols, of a Jewish world conspiracy, and this idea was integrated into the nascent totalitarian political ideologies of the 20th century. Both for fascism and for communism, Freemasonry became a target. In Germany after World War I, Freemason was identified as a scapegoat on which the defeat could be blamed. And Rosenberg, later chief ideologist of the Nazi Party, translated the protocols to German. Ludendorff, German army general of the First World War, wrote an immensely popular book on Freimaurerei und Weltverschwörung, Freemasonry and World Conspiracy. In Soviet Russia and later on in the East Bloc countries, Freemasonry was perceived as a threat and was eliminated. The same happened in Italy, Spain, Portugal, and the occupied countries of Europe. Lodges were closed down, their property seized, and and members persecuted, some of them also executed. Activities were forced to continue in the underground or ceased forever. The massive scale of fascist and communist persecution has seriously damaged Freemasonry, even in a country like Germany, and in most countries of Eastern Europe to this day. The perception of Freemasonry as a tool in Jewish world conspiracy has been integrated with the ideology of radical Islamistic movements such as Hamas, but can at the same time be found in the rhetoric of a number of political groups across the globe on the far right or far left margins of political opinions. Holocaust deniers, Orthodox Catholics, anti-capitalists, as much as radical Muslims, in many cases do share a joint perception of Freemasonry. In his pivotal study, Toxic to Democracy, journalist Chip Berlitt investigates American conspiracism, its roots, its figures of thought, and its perception of various groups that in the eyes of the conspiracy theorist aim at to control the world. Freemasonry is here linked to the Illuminati in these perceptions as one major out of 8 typical target groups of conspiracists. And he's done there's a fascinating report that is available online, which is titled Toxic to Democracy. And as you can see, he has gone through the material that you would find in American conspiracies and which groups are mentioned, and those who are trying to, I'm trying to be politically neutral here, those people who are trying to pervert the American values of democracy are all these people that we find around this circle here. Jews, liberal collectivists, Catholics, space aliens, plutocrats, secularists, Freemasons, and communists. Yeah? And here in Canada, you certainly get a pretty high dose of these ideas as well. I don't know if it's maybe the volcanic ashes or not, but these perceptions don't land that much in Europe, yes? But Chip Burnett's report is really very, very well researched. It's a fascinating paper. And in the reference to that, you certainly will get in the published version of this talk. Yes, I will come to my next example. Spectacular rituals. Exposures of Masonic ritual were published from the very beginning of Freemasonry on. They served multiple purposes that are different from the first 2 perceptions that are treated, links to politics and the idea of conspiracy. Claimed revelation of secret rituals of a secret order has always a spectacular, thrilling element up to Dan Brown's The Lost Symbol. Certain exposures aimed at to harm the fraternity, to ridicule it, or to attribute bizarre qualities to it. On the other hand, we find evidence that exposures even served a function as aide-memoirs. And certainly the existence of exposures did not prevent the spread of Freemasonry, which proves that the rituals and Masonic symbolism served a deeper and esoteric need among its practitioners, even in the Age of Enlightenment. With other words, exposures do not necessarily represent negative perception of Freemasonry, although Freemasonry itself, to the largest extent, has treated them with skepticism and often detestation. Already in the same year, the constitutions saw the light. In 1723, 2 versions of the Masonic catechisms appeared, and this is one that was published in the London journal The Postboy in December 1723. This trend would only change, not in quality, or only in design. In 1730, the first exposure was published, the first full-scale exposure was published with Samuel Pitcher's Masonry Dissected. And the first images of Masonic ritual appeared some 15 years later. In this remarkable series of prints, the first images ever that were produced about of Masonic ritual, the first and the third degree are exposed. So this is the scene from the first degree of Freemasonry, and the third. They were produced by a German printer called Wernigerode in Leipzig after a French original that curiously was manufactured by 2 women in France. So one can wonder, how did they know about the rituals, and how were they able to almost make photographic reproductions of what happened in the French lodge? And they show the French ritual practice at the time in the apprentice and the master's degree. A book titled L'Ordre de Franc-Maçon trahi et le secret des mobs révélés in 1745 also contained exposures and even rituals in which women were admitted to a secret order. This was the first time the 18th century saw how women performed rituals, and female participation in private space grew considerably in the subsequent decades. So here, definitely the exposure of this ritual if it was intended to stop the spread of this order, it had the opposite effect. Women were claiming more and more participation in secret space after this book had been published. And many more exposures would follow with little differences between them. Perhaps another 100 titles in the 18th century, and 150 titles in the 19th and the 20th century. But just to give, it becomes more and more spectacular, depending on the media development, of course. And what we see here is an illustration of a supposed illustration of the Knights Templars degree from the 19th century from an Irish anti-Masonic publication. And if you have read Dan Brown's book, this is the opening scene of the book, is in this image here. In France, under German Nazi occupation, an entire institute worked on the scientific examination of Freemasonry. One of the products of the propaganda machine was in the in parts quasi-documentary film Force Occulte, screened in 1941, wrongly says here 42. Here certainly the exposure of rituals served a purpose to underline the conspirative character of Freemasonry, but was also an accurate reenactment of rituals that were used in the Grand Orient at the time. And then if we move to the internet, of course, we find exposure of Masonic ritual on YouTube. So they are not only exposed on text pages on the internet, but also on sites like YouTube, where they serve various purposes ranging from mere spectacular revelation to conspiracy. Partly caused by the idea of links to politics, fear of secrecy and potential implications of ritual and content of Freemasonry, church and state authorities started to persecute and prohibit Freemasonry. Governmental prohibition of Freemasonry had occurred already in the 1730s and culminated in the investigation of Paris police chief Hérault, followed immediately by the first papal condemnation in 1738. But against such condemnations that occurred since 1738 up to these times almost, a number of apologetic writings were published, a dualism that runs through the centuries. This is, for instance, a direct response to a relation published with the Fourth Imprint in 1738 that came as a direct response upon Hérault and the papal condemnation. And here in this little booklet, Relations Apologiques, it was claimed that Freemason was nothing else than a learned academy where any scholarly question from all fields of human knowledge could be resolved. This text was translated to German and even Swedish in the same year it appeared, which says something about how this literature spreads across European space, and later put on the index and burned at the stake in Rome. This is another piece that I'm doing research on. It's a diorama, which is a box with cardboard cards put consequently behind each other, so that we create a three-dimensional effect. I could also lead a separate lecture on that, but I will not do that here. But if one studies the book that I talked about before and this one here, you find direct correspondences, so that this is the pictorial representation of the idea that Freemasonry is nothing else than scientific. And already when the new leadership of the fraternity in 1723 published its previously orally communicated methodological history, rules and regulations, this is the title page of Anderson's Constitutions from 1723, it did so in line with the new spirit of the time, the Enlightenment, where it was believed this information should be shared openly. A number of Masonic publications reached the public domain during the next decades. Especially Masonic songbooks were spread and contributed to a more sophisticated perception of the aim of fraternity. Certainly nervous about the growing perception of Masonic involvement in the French Revolution, the first English Masonic periodical was started in 1793 with the publication of the Freemasons magazine, and it came significantly to an end just a year before the Unlawful Societies Act was passed in Parliament in London. I'm currently carrying out a project on the content of the Freemasons magazine in comparison to a German Masonic journal that came out before the French Revolution in the 1780s. And Masonic periodics serve today, to my mind, almost the same purpose. Their main intention is to communicate internal information to their members, but they're also seen as a tool to communicate to an ignorant public environment the true purposes of Freemasonry. I'm not a communication or public relations expert, but I believe, from the viewpoint of a historian, that Freemasonry's strong focus upon charity hardly could in the past, and perhaps cannot balance other perceptions of Freemasonry. The purpose of this second part of my lecture was to present some selected developmental lines of perception and the kind of sources we can use in order to trace their genealogy. We have still not developed a systematic approach towards an analysis of the complete picture of perceptions as they have developed over time. Such a systematic approach must also include wider issues like gender, cultural impacts, public space, and performance. A variety of methods established in the humanities and social sciences need to be employed. Research into Freemasonry has the potential to offer academia fruitful areas of investigation. The richness of source material and an almost unlimited number of potential perspectives can constitute focal point of the initiatives launched here at Brock University today. Let me now, in the last part of the lecture, and there are only 2 pages left of it, outline a potential research agenda. Number 3 here, balancing facts and fictions through perception, a research agenda. Regardless of factual truth and authenticity, perceptions of Freemasonry play a significant, if not constitutive, role in our understanding of the most dynamic fraternal organization and its history ever. Perceptions live a life of their own. They develop an inherent power which allows them to exist over time, to change, to mutate, to adopt new qualities, or to adapt to new contexts. It is very rare that perceptions disappear. We cannot physically touch perceptions. They are not as such embodied in artifacts and do not materialize in events. However, perceptions are communicated through media such as prints and images and objects conveying messages or value attributions. Although perceptions primarily are the outcome of human imagination, it would go too far to claim that they are pure fiction. Between the tangible research object like a Masonic certificate, a membership list or a tracing board, and Lessing's famous and fictitious dialogue on Masonry between Ernest and Falk, perceptions mirror an individual viewpoint at a given point in time. When balancing between facts and fictions in the history of Freemasonry, perceptions point in both directions. They often refer to real events, but communicate at the same time ideal representations and value attributions, either negative or positive, about what is observed. And so far, perceptions neither a lie, nor is it necessarily true. Systematic research into perceptions of Freemasonry will open up a new door for the Masonic as much as the academic historian. Human imagination is a powerful tool in the formation of societies. Benedict Anderson claimed in his famous study, Imagined Communities, back in 1983, that national identity primarily is formed by shared acts of imagined relationship between members of a collective, mobilizing a shared history, culture, language, and or religion as factors of consolidation. Pierre Bourdieu reminds us that societal order is erected and maintained by performed speech acts, such as installation rituals mutually agreed upon in a human community. Language defines position in social space. Greek philosopher Castoriadis, in his The Imaginary Institution of Society of 1998, goes even further. Society, for Castoriadis, is a product of imagination. Research into perception of Freemasonry will facilitate a better understanding of the contexts of the fraternity throughout history. Hard work in making new sources available, such as membership records, minute books, correspondence in Masonic ritual, makes only sense if it from there is possible to contextualize them in a broader framework. For the historian, the significance of Freemasonry is not confined within Freemasonry itself, but in the way it interacts with society and culture. Ladies and gentlemen, I've taken you a long journey from the first press articles of Freemasonry in 1722 to Freemasonry on the internet, right now into the second decade of our new millennium. What is perception and what is reality in the history of Freemasonry? The way Freemasonry has interpreted and described itself, the way individual Freemasons like Charles Alfred Sankey shaped their lives, the way it has been ridiculed, mocked and exposed both by members, ex-members and outsiders, the way it has been attacked by political and religious authorities on all grades on the scale, the role it plays in the insinuations of the conspiracy theorists, or even in the way the over-enthusiastic Masonic as well as the negligent academic scholar read insignificance in Freemasonry that perhaps never was there. Research into Freemasonry and related fraternal organizations is a rich field of studies that ties well into most traditions in arts, humanities and social sciences. The historian, the performance scholar, the culture geographer, the sociologist, the political scientist will all find entrances into this subject area. There is a great potential to turn it into a truly transdisciplinary focus point for this university, developing a new and exciting area of knowledge exchange with the non-academic community. It has been a great pleasure to present this first lecture on the way towards this vision. And I wish the initiative of the Grand Lodge of Canada and its cooperation with Brock University all success. And I want to express my gratitude for the confidence directed towards myself to present this lecture. For Charles Alfred Sankey, science and arts were so closely related that they almost could not be separated from each other. Freemasonry enabled him to look across the narrow borders of specialization and to overcome the suffocating colossus of detail. It is my sincere hope that by inaugurating this lecture series at Brock University, students and scholars alike will experience the same liberation. Thank you very much.